international business is fraught with a lot of different contrasts, comparisons, different structures because you're dealing with different countries, different cultures, different customs, different traditions as you go through. And you have to almost go through and have some type of uniformity to give a proper analysis you go through. The analysis have to include with your business, and can your business line up with another country? Can your business go through and sell your product? If you're selling a $100 product in another country, all of a sudden you have to deal with the fact is, can the economy itself sustain that? Is there enough people in that economy to sit there and buy your product, or are they getting by on a bare subsistence living standard and will never be able to afford your product? All these have to be paid attention to when it comes down to looking at the international business. Here's an example of two huge, gigantic emerging economies as you go out. China versus India. And we look at it, you think that China is way far ahead of India, but the population size is huge between both countries as they go through. China, India, they're competing with each other for wealth and influence. They have border skirmishes right now. Who knows what's going to happen with that as you go through? China right now leads in terms of economic development, but sometimes people believe that India has advantages in the long term, including in English fluency, since China wrestles with over a dozen different languages within its border and has a much younger demographic. They also have a really strong open educational system compared to China's closed system in that whole process. Right now, India has a huge strength in the area of services, while China is a huge manufacturing powerhouse. Both of them have a lot of different interactivity. To some extent, India, because of the fact it deals with services, deals with a global perspective in talking to different clientele versus selling a product to somebody else where there's very little human interaction in the process. So we're going to see what happens, but let's look at a couple of facts because this is what this chapter is all about, looking for development as you go through. Look over here in China. They really have a true, what we call an emerging middle class. To some extent, China looks an awful lot like the United States did back in the 1920s and 30s, where also we had mass production hitting the assembly lines and boom, they started paying wages where the people running on the assembly lines, the actual workers, could buy the cars, and all of a sudden you had a huge economic boom and activity as you go through. Look at India. It's only just a little over 1/5 the size of the per capita GNI, which is a measurement of the gross national income. We'll talk about that a little bit later in this chapter, but right now we're just comparing. It looks much smaller than China. And by the way, it is, except for the fact, a couple things. India is now only beginning to experience the growth of a middle class. The roads are congested. The telephone poles in the backyard are loaded with sometimes dozens, sometimes even hundreds of wires as you go through, as the whole country crosses itself and tries to sit down there and goes through and tries to sit down there and find its own pathway into capitalism as you go through. Two different economic systems. One in India is very free and open. The other in China, they have been free and open, but right now they're shutting down and taking super powerful control with the central government dictating the everyday lives and removing freedoms from the individuals who go through. It's going to be interesting watching this, even though it looks right now from an economic basis, China has a big jump over India. We'll see over the next 30 years what really happens in the process. Part of this whole thing is there's so much more complexity on the international aspect of should I sell in India, should I sell in China? At one point, Apple came out and they were selling their brand new iPhone 11, yes, boom, boom, rah, rah, and everything else. They sold it in India, and all of a sudden people went into the phone store because there's not designated phones just to sell just Apple. They had different ones, and all of a sudden now Samsung had 5-to-1 ratio of sales over Apple because the phone was priced too far out of the market. Apple, all of a sudden, they got so full of themselves, they forgot about the fact that some people can't afford to spend $1,000 for a phone. Samsung never lost track of that, and they were selling a massive number of phones. And they really appreciated the fact that Apple came out with such a super expensive phone because they grabbed market share. And once you grab it, sometimes people never go back in the process. It was a total blunder by Apple, blindsided by the arrogance of its super success in the United States, they forgot about developing countries in the process. So the more complex sometimes you go through, you get over here, we're booming, we're making massive profit, and you come over here and you expect to win it over here, and boom, it disappears, and you're wondering, what happened? So the process. So it looks like a mule looking at a new gate. Whoa, what's that over there? I have no idea. And all of a sudden, a clear blue sky. Duh, I should have thought of that in the process. So same thing with the international market. Sometimes we make the assumption it's successful here, it'll be great over here, and you don't realize it, and all of a sudden some type of barrier jumps up that you never expected to see. We have to sit down and do an overall outlook on the economy and then run it past the people that live in the country. I mean, the whole idea of you trying to manage it here from the United States, trying to manage something that happens in Mongolia or whatever, Slovakia, and the whole thing, you want to sit down and pay attention to what's going on there by looking at the data of the actual and prospective markets. The economic forecast is going to have a huge, huge issue on all these different areas that you'll have in your company. Anywhere from the marketing manager and the effect on sales to the personnel as you go through. How do you compensate? Do you provide benefits? If so, what kind of benefits? Do you provide a full medical package with dental and vision, or is just this okay over here in the process? So you have to look at that. Look at the financial part. Look at the production part as you go through. How about accountant? You want to sit down and make your accountability, but if you have too many controls, the people feel infringed upon. If you don't have enough, they may sit down there and cheat the company as you go through because you don't know how it's going to be. So pay attention to all these because your economic data is going to have an impact on each and every single area, and it should have good review before you plunge into the country. And sometimes you just want to sit down there and put your toe in rather than sit there dive in headfirst as you go through. The foreign environment has a huge amount of uncontrollable forces outside the home country that surround and influence the firm in that country. The interaction between domestic and foreign environments or between sets of foreign nationals is really a huge issue and very different than just being in the domestic market where you're already comfortable and know the culture. There's a couple numbers you have to know about. One is gross domestic product, which is the monetary value of all the goods and services produced in the country. A huge number, you have to know the term on, by the way, it's on the test, gross national income. It's similar to the GDP, okay? But that being said, it really is a measurement of the income of the average citizen in that nation as you go through. It really focuses on domestic production of goods and services and income from abroad. Here's some examples of the GNI, gross national income. The high income economies per capita is $12,535 in USD or United States dollars as you go through. I read ranges, even though some countries don't use USD, but for purposes of our class, I put these numbers into our terminology for the United States. So a high income economy is $12,535 based in 2020. A middle income economy really has a range of $1,036 to $12,535. That's right, $1,000 a year annual income of a person puts him in the middle income. By the way, you Americans, pay attention. We are wealthy, wealthy beyond the dreams of almost anybody in these countries. So every time we talk about, I'm really poverty stricken because I couldn't sit down and cash my $1,000 paycheck. They live for $1,000 a year. You're worried about the $1,000 paycheck you just got. Oh, okay. Sometimes we don't appreciate where we live and how we live. We live in an awesome place that really is thriving and prospering by the standards of the entire planet as you go through. And if you look at, there's two different segments, an upper middle income and a lower middle income economy as you go through. The lower end is 1,036 to 4,045 based on 2020 numbers as you go through. So really the upper middle is above that is 4,046 up to $12,535. So you have really four different economies, and the low income countries is $1,036 or less. I recall visiting one country and the cultures are very different. In this case, the country was Egypt. The year is 1998. I'm in there and I realized when I went into the country that the average annual income at the time was $838 a year. That is super low, below the poverty level, not just a little bit, by massively in the United States. You know, the strange thing about that, though, is even though it was a low income country, here's my experience of Egypt. Okay, we went at the end of the day, we went down to downtown Cairo. We're walking the streets at 1:30 in the morning. And the strangest thing about it was, felt safe. There was certainly a cultural differences between that and that country versus this. Not only that, the driver, when we went to go to the airport, we spent a month there. So he went to the airport. He forgot to unpack his trunk. So he took out a Foot Locker full of sports equipment. He took out a baseball glove, a racquetball racket, and he put them on the sidewalk in downtown Cairo in a place called Heliopolis. Now, he didn't put it in the middle of the sidewalk. He shoved it over the bushes and everything else. And I thought, why don't you just go up to the apartment? It's on the 7th floor. It's too much work. I'll just leave it here. He put it on the sidewalk in downtown Cairo and came back an hour and 40 minutes, and it was still there. Tell me what that says about the country. I mean, just the fact that, number one, he was confident would be there, and number two, it was there. I'm not certain I would leave a Foot Locker worth of maybe hundreds of dollars in equipment here in beautiful Orange County on the sidewalk for 2 hours. He did, and he was totally confident of it because of the culture that he was in. Just because you have a low income culture doesn't mean that you have all the things that we attribute to low income, including crime. Crime often is an absence of morality or values of the people themselves in the city sometimes. I got to tell you, I was totally stunned when I walked away and I got in a plane and left Egypt about the quality of life of the people. And no, they weren't rich, but they had solid values as a culture. So never underestimate it, and never make an assumption of a country just because they don't have a lot of money and they don't have a lot of technology. So that being said, let me give you the comparison. The 2020 GNI in the US is $65,910. Whoa, let me back up a minute. Let me back up a little bit. 12,535 is the high income, and that's 65.9 here. Whoa, look at Canada, 43,000. Look at Mexico. Mexico's more normal than the average. It's $884. It really would be a matter of, let's classify it. Oh, let's see. It would be a lower middle income economy to go through. We don't know how good we have it until we see what the rest of the world is like. We really take the world and we have a developing economy and we classify that, and there's certain classifications about the low income nations, and then we have the developed economy, developing low income, less technology infrastructures and lower living standards. The developed economy is high income, industrialized nations, high living standards, and the most technically developed infrastructures you go through. Big contrast here in the process. The economic comparisons are critical for business as you're going to go in. The average income may not support the product you plan to sell to the masses. So know and compare and contrast the cost for developed versus developing countries before you enter into business into that country. Take care.